When a TV news program raised concerns in August about President Trump's slow pace of hiring top officials in federal agencies, Trump tweeted his reply, "We are not looking to fill all of those positions. Don't need many of them. Reduce size of government." But Trump is not actually reducing the size of government. The few thousand jobs Trump has not filled are a drop in the bucket for a federal workforce that stood at about 2.8 million in August, more or less unchanged since December. The federal workforce is now back to 2013 levels after dipping to about 2.7 million in 2014. And if you include state and local workers, some of whom are paid for by federal government block grants, government employment nationwide has been at a 7-year high since last September, hovering about 22.3 million. Despite a short-term hiring freeze at the start of his administration, Trump has not imposed major workforce reductions for one obvious reason: Congress has not yet passed his budget, so the government is still running under the last budget approved by former President Barack Obama. But a Trump budget will not likely cut government employment either, despite significant cuts to several federal agencies outlined in the budget the president proposed in May. The president isn't looking to specifically cut the number of employees within the federal government, said John Zwartacki, spokesman for the White House Office of Management and Budget. In fact, in some instances such as the Department of Defense and Veterans Health Care, he's looking to expand the workforce. Instead of focusing on raw numbers, Trump's goal is to eliminate elements of bad government, making it more efficient, effective, and accountable at meeting its proper and appropriate functions, Zwartacki said. Trump's initial budget request included nearly $500 billion in new defense spending, $200 billion in infrastructure spending, and a new program for paid parental leave. All of those increases would boost the government workforce. Photo, Michael Reynolds, European Press Photo Agency. Federal employment hasn't really changed much in decades, said Paul Light, New York University professor of public service. In the 1950s, Congress set a cap on government employment, and while that cap has since been rescinded, the notion that the federal workforce should hover at or about 2 million, not including the Postal Service, was pretty much established, Light said. And we've held to that. Republican and Democratic administrations get pounded when there is a slight increase, let's say 50,000 feds are added to the payroll, but in the grand scheme of things, it's a rounding error, Light says. There have been some ups and downs of a few 100,000 workers. For example, federal employment spiked to nearly 3.5 million for a few months in 2010, as the government hired hundreds of thousands of short-term workers for the decennial census. And after 2001, the federal government got a bit bigger with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, and the pursuit of two major wars. But over the long haul, the numbers are remarkably stable. In January 2002, there were about 2.75 million federal employees, according to data maintained by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, about 50,000 fewer than August of this year. Light also argues that federal employment is really just the tip of the iceberg, because the federal government spends billions of dollars each year hiring contractors, who do not count as government employees. In a paper he will be releasing in early October, Light contends that counting contractors and people working under federal grants, the total federal workforce is about 7.3 million people. There are about 2.6 hidden, off-budget employees for every Fed. These are the people who are most at risk in any budget cuts, said Eric Grosjean, the former commissioner of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The cuts might be a little more heavily weighted toward contractor jobs than career civil service jobs, partly because agencies want to preserve the human capital that they have developed, Grosjean said. You have employees who know your programs, so when you need to expand temporarily or bring on some technical skill that you don't have in-house, you would bring on a contractor. But when the budgets are tight, you are more likely to cut your contracting expenses. Federal employment rules also make it hard to downsize. To make significant cuts in the federal workforce, they need to have a reason to actually lay any people off, like a major budget cut, Grosjean said. To have a reduction in force, you have to have some reason for it, she said. Short of that, Any reduction at this point is probably largely through attrition. Even if Trump were to make major cuts in federal employment, there are about 7 to 8 times as many state and local employees as there are federal level, so what is happening at the state and local level is going to sway.